deadly battles have been fought, people slaughtered, churches robbed, souls destroyed, young women and virgins deflowered, respectable wives and widows dishonored. Towns, manors and buildings burned, and robberies, cruelties and ambushes committed on the highways. Justice has failed because of these things. The Christian faith has withered, and commerce has perished, and so many other wickednesses and horrid things have followed from these wars that they cannot be spoken, numbered, or written down. Jean II, King of France, 1360.
The Prince of Wales appeared in the English front line, his bright flag, the largest on the English side, behind and above him, and the French responded with a roar as they renewed their attack. But the English matched the war shout and surged forward themselves. Shield met shield with a crash, the weapons fell and thrust, and it was the English who forged ahead. The men trusted to guard the Prince of Wales were among the most experienced and savage in all the army. They had fought a score of battles, from Crécy to minor skirmishes, and they fought with cold-blooded ruthlessness. The two Frenchmen closest to the prince were felled instantly. Neither was killed. One was stunned by a mace blow and he collapsed to his knees, and the other took an axe blow to his right elbow that shattered the bone and left him weaponless. He was dragged backwards by his companions, and that rearward movement spread to the neighbouring Frenchmen. The half-stunned man tried to stand, but the prince kicked him backwards onto the ground and trod on his armoured wrist. "Finish him," he said to the man behind him, who used a steel-shod foot to push up the fallen man's visor and rammed down with a sword point. Blood sprayed on the prince. "Give me room," the prince bellowed. He stepped forward and swung the axe, feeling the impact jar up his arms as the blade chopped into a man's waist. He wrenched the axe free and thrust it forward. The haft was topped with a steel spike that dented the wounded man's breastplate, but did not pierce it. The man staggered, and the prince took another step forward and sliced the heavy weapon at the enemy's neck, where the sharp blade went through the mail aventail that he wore beneath his helmet to cover his neck and shoulders. The man staggered, and the prince kicked him backwards and swung at another enemy. He was fighting without a visor, and he could plainly see Charles, the Dauphin, not 10 paces away. "Come and fight me!" he bellowed in French. "You and me, Charles, come and fight!" The Dauphin, so thin and awkward, did not bother to answer. He saw the Prince of Wales beat a man down with his axe, and saw a Frenchman plunge a shortened lance that ripped open the prince's jupon. Beneath the jupon, the prince's cuirass was sculpted with his coat of arms. The lance thrust again, and the prince slashed the axe down onto the assailant's shoulder. The Dauphin saw the big blade bite through the armour, and saw the blood spray sudden and bright. "Back, your highness!" one of the Dauphin's guards said. That guardian could see that the enemy prince was determined to fight his way through to the heir to the French throne. That could not happen. And the English were fighting like demons, so it might happen if he did not act. "Back, your highness!" he said again, and this time pulled the Dauphin away. The Dauphin was speechless. He had surprised himself by how little fear he had felt once the battle began. True, he was well guarded, and the men charged with his safety were all brutally efficient fighters, but the Dauphin had tried to do his best. He had thrust a sword hard at an enemy knight and thought he had hurt the man. Most of all, he had been fascinated. He had observed the battle with an intelligent eye, and, though he was appalled at the butchery, he found it intriguing. It was a stupid way to decide great matters, he thought, for the decision was surely a lottery once the brawling began. There had to be a cleverer way to defeat the enemy. "Back, sire!" a man bellowed at him, and the Dauphin allowed himself to be drawn back through the gap in the hedge. How long had they been fighting, he wondered. It seemed like minutes, but now he saw that the sun was high above the trees, and so it must have been at least an hour. "Time flies," he said. "Did you speak, sire?" a man shouted. "I said time flies." "Christ Jesus," the man said. He watched the Prince of Wales, who was standing cocksure above the men he had beaten down with his bloodied axe. The prince shook the axe at the retreating enemy. "Come back!" he bellowed. "He's a fool," the Dauphin said in puzzlement. "Sire?" "I said he's a fool." "A fighting fool," the the man said in grudging admiration. "He's enjoying this," the Dauphin said. "Why wouldn't he, sire? Only a fool could enjoy it. To a fool this is paradise, and he's wallowing in idiocy." The man in charge of the Dauphin's guards thought the 18-year-old prince was mad, and he felt a surge of anger that he was trusted with the life of this pale-faced, hollow-chested weakling with his short legs and long arms, and now, it seemed, with a brain made of soft cheese. A prince should look like a prince, like the Prince of Wales. The Frenchman hated to admit it, but the enemy prince looked like a proper ruler in his broad-chested, blood-splattered glory. He looked like a real warrior, not like this pale shred of an excuse for a man. But the pale shred was the Dauphin, and so the man kept his voice respectful. "We must send messengers to your father," he said, "to the king." "I know who my father is. We must request him to send more men, sire." "Do so," the Dauphin said, "but make sure he sends his most foolish fools." "Fools, sire." "Send the messengers, do it now." So the French sent for help. The French were pulling back, step by step, watching their enemy, but going back along the edge or else trying to force a way through the tangling brambles. The English and Gascons did not follow. Men on horseback behind the line were bellowing at them, "Keep the line, no pursuit, let them go." The temptation was to pursue the French and capture rich prisoners, but such a pursuit would break the line open, and if the French had failed to do that with steel, then the English would not do it themselves with greed. They stayed in line. But as the French went, so the women from the English baggage came with wineskins filled with river water. There was not enough for everyone to slake their thirst, but men drank what they could. And trumpets sounded in the valley. The enemy was coming again. The first messenger to reach the king was dusty. Sweat had made channels through the dust on his face. His horse was white with sweat. He dismounted and knelt. "My liege," he said, "the prince, your son, requests reinforcements." The king was gazing at the far hill. He could see the English banners through the widest gap in the hedge. "What happened?" he asked. "The enemy is weakened, sire, very weakened, but not broken, no, sire." Two more messengers came, and the king pieced together an account of what had happened so far that morning. The messengers heaped praise on his elder son, saying the Dauphin had fought magnificently, stories that the king disbelieved but pretended to accept. What did seem true was that the English had indeed been weakened, but had kept their discipline and held their line intact. "They are stubborn, sire," one of the messengers said. "Ah, yes, stubborn," the king said vaguely. He watched his eldest son's troops come back down the far hill. They came slowly. They must have been weary because it had been a long fight. Most clashes of men-at-arms were over in minutes, but the two armies must have fought for at least an hour. The king watched a wounded man limp up the hill, using a sword as a stave to support his weight. "My son is unwounded?" he asked the messenger. "Yes, sire. Thank God, sire." "Thank God indeed," the king said, then beckoned to the Count of Ventador. "Go to the Dauphin," he ordered him, "and tell him he is to leave the field." "Leave the field?" The Count was not certain he had heard correctly. "He is the heir. He fought enough, he has proved his courage, and now he must be kept safe. Tell him he is to ride to Poitiers with his entourage. I shall join him there this evening." "Yes, sire," the Count said, and called for his horse. He knew he was being sent with the message because the Dauphin would distrust such a command unless it was brought by a man close to the king, and the Count decided the king was right. The heir to the throne must be kept safe. "And tell the Duke of Orleans to take up the fight," the king commanded. "He is to advance, sire." "He is to advance, he is to fight, and he is to win," the king said. He looked at his youngest son, just 14. "You will not leave with Charles," he said. "I don't want to leave, father." "You will witness victory, Philippe." "Shall we fight, father?" the boy asked eagerly. "Your uncle will fight next. We shall join him if we're needed." "I hope he needs us," Philippe said. King Jean smiled. He did not want to deprive his younger son of any of the day's excitement, though he desperately wanted him kept safe. Perhaps, he thought, he would advance his 3,000 men at the battle's end to join in the destruction of the English. His men were among the finest knights and men-at-arms that France possessed, which was why they served in the King's battle. "You will see some fighting," he promised his son, "but you must swear not to leave my side." "I swear it, father." The Count of Ventador had ridden his horse through the mass of men commanded by the king's brother. That was the shortest way to the Dauphin. The king saw him deliver the message to the duke, then ride on to find the Dauphin, who was now halfway down the far slope. The English had not pursued him. They just waited behind the hedge, a sign, the king hoped, that they truly were weakened. "When the duke attacks," the king called to Marshal Clermont, "we will advance our battle to his present position." "Yes, sire." The first hammer blow had weakened the English. 2 more waited. And then only 1 waited. Because, as the king watched in disbelief, his brother decided to leave the field with the Dauphin. The Duke of Orléans had not fought. His swords were unstained by enemy blood, yet he called for his horses and led his troops northwards. "What the devil?" the king asked the morning air. "What in Christ's name is he doing?" Marshal Clermont asked. "Sweet Jesus," a man said. "He's leaving!" "You fool!" the king screamed at his brother, who was much too far away to hear. "You spavined fool, you coward, you cretinous bastard, you gutless turd!" His face was red, spittle flying from his mouth. "Advance the banners!" the king shouted. He dismounted and gave the reins of his horse to a groom. If his brother would not fight, then the king's battle, the finest in the army, would have to decide the day. "Trumpets!" the king shouted, still angrily. "Give me that damned axe! Sound the trumpets! Sound the advance! Forward!" The trumpets sounded, the drums beat, and the oriflamme was carried towards the enemy. "What are they doing?" The Prince of Wales had mounted his horse so that he could see the enemy better, and what he saw was worrying. The French second battle was going northwards. "They plan to attack our right flank?" he suggested. "And our centre at same time, sire." Sir Reginald Cobham, old in war, was watching the last French battle advance. This was the battle that flew the oriflamme and the royal standard. Sir Reginald leaned forward and slapped at a horsefly that had settled on his destrier's neck. "Maybe someone over there has some sense at last." "The Earl of Salisbury has archers?" the prince asked. "Plenty, but does he have enough arrows?" The prince grunted. A servant brought him a pitcher of wine diluted with water, but the prince shook his head. "Make sure every other man drinks before I do," he ordered in a voice loud enough to be heard 30 or 40 paces away. "A carter brought 10 barrels of water up the hill, sire," the Earl of Warwick said. "He did? Good man!" The prince looked at a servant. "Find him. Give him a mark." The silver mark was a valuable coin. "No, give him 2. They're not very eager, are they?" He was looking at the Duke of Orléans' troops, whom he had presumed were about to attack the Earl of Salisbury's men on the English right, but to his bemusement, those enemy troops were heading even farther north. Some had mounted their horses, some walked, and some lingered in the valley's bed as though uncertain what they should do. "Jean," the prince called. "My lord." Jean de Grailly, Captal de Bou, who had stayed close to the prince for much of the battle, nudged his horse closer. "Sire?" "What are those devils doing?" Mounted attack," the Captal suggested, but he sounded very uncertain. If the French did plan a charge of mounted knights, then they were taking their horses a long way from the English line. Some had already vanished over the distant skyline. "Or perhaps they want to be the first into the whorehouses at Poitiers," the Captal suggested. "What sensible fellows they are," the prince said. He frowned, watching the receding troops. About half of the Duke of Orléans' battle were going northwards, the other half had stayed where they were to be joined by the Dauphin's men who had already fought. Then some of those began to follow the Duke of Orléans' banner northwards. That banner, instead of being carried towards the right of the English line, was heading steadily north and westwards. "By God, the prince said in astonishment. I do believe you're right. They're racing to get the best horse. Giddy up, fellows! He shouted the encouragement towards the disappearing enemy, then patted his horse. Not you, old fellow. You have to stay here. He looked back to the French king's troops, who were now advancing towards him. He must be very confident, he said, to send troops away. Or very foolish, the Earl of Warwick said. There were a dozen horsemen about the prince. They were the wise men, the experienced men, their eyes creased from staring at distant enemies, their skin darkened by the sun, their armour scratched and dented and their weapon hilts worn smooth from use. They had fought in Normandy, Brittany, Gascony, France and Scotland, and they trusted each other and, more importantly, the prince trusted them. And to think, the prince said, that this morning I was expecting to be a hostage. I'm sure Jean de Valois would accept the offer now, sire, the Earl of Warwick said, refusing to call Jean the King of France, a title claimed by Edward of England. I don't believe what I think I'm watching, the prince said. He was frowning at the retreating French troops, who really did seem to be leaving the battlefield, not just the Dauphin's tired men, but the Duke of Orleans' fresh troops as well. Some had remained on the field, and those men were joining the king's battle. I suppose they think those fellows are sufficient. He pointed at the approaching men-at-arms. The king's great standard, flamboyant in blue and gold, had reached the valley's bottom, and now the great spread of armoured men began to climb. My lord, the prince turned to the captal, you have horsemen? I have 60 men mounted, sire. The rest are in the line. 60, the prince said thoughtfully. He glanced back at the approaching French. 60 was not enough. His battered army might have around the same number of men as the King of France's approaching battle, but the enemy was fresh. The prince's men were tired, and he did not want to weaken his exhausted line by taking men-at-arms from the ranks. But then a happy thought occurred. Take 100 archers with you, all mounted. Sire, the Earl of Warwick asked, wondering what the prince was thinking. They plan to strike us hard, the prince said. So let's see how they like being struck themselves. He turned back to the captal. Let them engage us first, my lord, then strike from the rear. The captal was smiling. It was not a pleasant smile. I need an English flag, sire. So they know who's killing them. So your archers don't use our horses for target practice, sire. My God, Warwick said. You're going to charge an army with 160 men. No, we're going to slaughter an army, the prince said. With the help of God, St. George, and Gascony. The prince leaned from the saddle and clasped the captal's hand. Go with God, my lord, and fight like the devil. Even the devil doesn't fight like a Gascon, sire. The prince laughed. He smelt victory.